I was just trying to get Eric in trouble.
Oh, come on.
This is the One Accord Podcast, and we're back together again today for another episode in our Biblical Theology project. Today, we are scheduled to finish up our discussion on the book of Numbers, and I'm looking forward to that discussion with these brothers in Christ of mine. Let's go ahead and bring in Eric first and foremost. Eric, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Been very busy, to say the least. As you guys know, just got a new puppy, so my blood pressure's high, and I'm very alert and ready to get at it.
Did you guys do that on purpose, or?
Well, we talked about this for probably 10 years, and we finally went ahead and did it.
Now was the time to raise that blood pressure.
Well, a long
good.
conversation.
Yeah.
Well, praise the Lord, I guess. That's good to see you this morning. Brother Greg, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Joe?
Doing just fine. Was as we were talking before, no puppies in my household, but did have to scrape off my car for the first time this season, so that was exciting. It's winter in Michigan again, and so that's a delight. Micah, how about you? How are you doing today?
Well, I am a little bit under the weather, but otherwise I'm fine. I preached very under the weather yesterday. Feels like I'm on the upswing a little bit today, but so everyone be patient with me. The brain fog is hitting me hard.
I'm told that excuse doesn't work. Well, at least it doesn't work for me. I'm sure not sure.
Oh, it'll work for Micah. No, that's fine.
Okay.
We'll be very nice to Micah for sure. Yeah. You mentioned, I think, last week that your kids were not feeling well. Did you catch this from them, or is this something different than what was going on last week?
Yep, they gave me whatever they had, and for some reason it really, really wants to hang on for a long time. Like sometimes it's like a 48-hour thing. This has been going on for days.
If we ask your wife, she'd
48
probably
days,
say
yeah.
Micah's just really milking it. Everybody
Yeah.
else had it; they were fine, and this guy's a real baby.
He's
The whole
asking me to
man
get him
cold thing.
stuff.
Be nice to him. Be patient with him. Give me a break. Come on. Well, we'll be nice to you because we're all men here, and we understand that the man cold is serious business. So we're glad to have you. Anyway, let's go ahead and get right into it. Who's got something for us from the book of Numbers? Again, if you're watching this and you're not familiar, we're covering Numbers 31 through 36. It's a fairly big portion of Scripture. We're not going to read it all, so if you're not familiar with it, maybe press pause, maybe read it for yourself. But who's got something from Numbers 31 for us to talk about today?
Yeah, I'll start off the conversation. I'm interested in the ordering of the chapters, why the chapters are placed where they are. And as I was reading this, I noticed that the chapter begins with God commanding Moses to take vengeance on the Midianites for leading Israel into sin at Peor. That was back in Numbers 25. So that was a few chapters ago. And it struck me that God is commanding Moses to do this now. But this is, several chapters later. So my question is, why didn't God command Israel to destroy the Midianites immediately after the events at Peor? Why is there a multi-chapter gap between these events, or is there?
First of all, we should recognize that in chapter 25, right after that event, verse 17, God does say, "Be hostile to the Midianites and strike them." And so the way I read the text, and I could be totally wrong, but the way I read the text, when you're recording narrative, you aren't always concerned with maintaining or presenting a perfectly, consecutive order of events. And so you might need to put 3 chapters worth of material to fill in context before you move on to the next thing in the timeline. And so the idea that I'm not sure what 3 chapters of life would have felt like between verse 17 of chapter 25 and the beginning of chapter 31. If that felt like 3 chapters for them, or if it just felt like maybe the next day.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting too that these narratives are not granular in every detail. They're not. It's not trying to give us. It's not trying to give us everything that happened with regard to a particular set of situations. It gives us specific information for a purpose that fits in with the overall theme of the book. So, maybe
in the order that the narrator is trying to move the story along. Because at least I want to recognize that this isn't just raw recorded history, right? It's a story that's being told, and there's, with all good narrative, there's a flow, and there's, looking back and looking forward, and so want to recognize that as part of literature.
Yep, absolutely. And sometimes it serves the narrator's purpose to not include some details. And so there could have been circumstantial things why, in that exact incident, however long ago it was, that they did not destroy them at that moment. There could have been circumstantial stuff going on that kept that from happening. And now circumstances and God's providence allowed them opportunity. So I don't know that we can really give a hard and fast why to that question.
Sure. Yep. And I think those are good answers. There was something I missed when we went through 25 and 26. So God commanded Moses to slaughter the Midianites back in, Numbers 25 verses 16 through 18, which Greg pointed out earlier. I guess I didn't put the two and two together, but after the plague in Numbers 25:8 that killed 24,000 people, another census had to be taken in Numbers 26. And I think the obvious reason is, tens of thousands of people were killed. Now we got to retake the census to make sure we know how many soldiers we have, how many people we have. Then Joshua was appointed to take the place of Moses so that he would be able to assume leadership after Moses died. That's in Numbers 27. So this sequence of events actually explains why Israel didn't immediately attack Midian. They had to prepare for war, and they had to transfer leadership before they could move on. So to me, as I read this now with these details in mind, it actually makes sense why Israel couldn't just turn around, a minute later and slaughter the Midianites. I had another question. This comes from verse 6 of Numbers 31. It says that Phinehas, the priest, was sent to the war. So my question is, what purpose did Phinehas as a priest serve in the war?
Well, it's interesting the stuff that he's told to bring. And Moses sent them to the war, 1,000 from each tribe, together with Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, with the vessels of the sanctuary and the trumpets for the alarm in his hand. Okay, so the trumpets for the alarm, obviously, that has some sort of the trumpet is used for signaling the armies. But the vessels of the sanctuary, it's not exactly explicit which vessels he's supposed to take. Could have been. I've read people that said that perhaps it was the ark, or perhaps it was other temple vessels. But it appears that there was some sort of intercessory role being played by Phinehas in this situation, as well as it could have been like a sort of chaplaincy situation, perhaps, where the men who are going to be fighting need spiritual support. So he's there to intercede on behalf of the army and perhaps to care for the people who are fighting.
Yeah, I guess when I read this, I see, first of all, he's there as a priest. He's there as the representative of God, and so the holy vessels make sense to me. But also the trumpet makes sense to me, because at that time the trumpet was your communication. It was your comms radio. So command and control was based upon what your trumpets could communicate. You could change the pace, you could change the direction, you could change the intent of your army based upon what your trumpet blasts were doing. And so it's my assumption that as Phinehas was serving as God's representative there, the direction at least was being communicated through him as he was sounding trumpets, as I would understand warfare and communication in the battlefield space at that time.
Joe, any thoughts on this?
Anything I could say would only be adding speculation, so I'll let that be.
This may be the only the only chance that we talk about this in any even a little bit of detail. And because of that, and maybe not, I don't know, but you guys already talked about the trumpets. I think what you said about the trumpets is right. I think that one of the things that the priest was responsible for, and this was kind of like what Micah said about the chaplaincy. The priest would encourage the soldiers and remind them to trust in the Lord for their victory. And I admit that that is mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 20, first 4 verses.
Why'd you admit it?
Well, I shouldn't
Your
have.
conscience bother you or something?
I thought, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I'm not going to be dishonest about it.
Well, let's make sure we reward your honesty with a full demerit. So, congratulations.
Okay. Okay. But naturally, when the Israelites are going to war, they're just like anybody else, right? They're fearful, and they're about to go into battle, not with guns, but with swords, very blunt weapons. Warfare every time is brutal, and it's terrible. But you can imagine going into battle and anticipating being stabbed or dismembered or something like that, and the horror that that they may have had. So the priest is there to encourage them, to help them to trust in the Lord, and I think that was one of the main purposes. Okay, question 3 for this chapter. After the slaughter of Midian, the Israelites captured, among other things, women and children and brought them to Moses. And Moses was angry with the captains for not killing the women because they led the Israelites astray at Peor. But Moses gave them permission to keep the virgins for themselves. That's mentioned in Numbers 31:18. And the thought of taking virgins as spoils of war is very offensive to us. It offends our modern day sensibilities. So how would you guys respond to someone who was offended by this idea that Moses allowed the Israelites to take the virgins for themselves?
Well, I'd respond with a question. Would you rather have them die? That's the other option. So they can either be taken and assimilated into Israelite culture, which I think the text implies, obviously, age dependent. Those who were very young would have remained in the camp until they were of marriageable age, and then married Israelite men. And then those who were of marriageable age probably would have married the Israelite warriors as well. But what would you rather have happen? Do you think it's better for them to? Do you think it's better for them to die with the rest of their people? So this sort of assumes we are so cushy and privileged in our culture. We don't have to you don't have to make hard decisions like this. So I'm sure that there was some part of them. Well, yes, there's going to be difficulty assimilating to a new culture, and there's going to be okay, but the other option is that they die, and then also take into account that the Midianites were a nomadic people that sort of lived in the desert areas bordering the land of Canaan. And there was actually Midianites that belonged to several different peoples. And this is the Moabite Midianites that we're talking about. Now, after their people have been destroyed, what are they going back to? There's, if they were just, okay, let's say that, okay, we'll just let them go. What are they going back to? They live in the desert. They're all women and girls. They're gonna, so either you're gonna release them where they're gonna be destitute and afflicted and they're gonna die in the wilderness, or I guess the other option would be devote them to destruction along with the rest of their people. But there's no option that's better for them than to be brought into the Israelite camp, assimilated into that culture, and by the way, have the knowledge of the true and living God. So the objections to this kind of thing. There's a whole bunch of things.
It reminds me of the modern feminist argument for abortion. For the good of this person, we should murder. For the good of this woman, we should murder this baby girl. This, your logic doesn't hold. And so, in the same way, I completely agree with you, Micah. It is better that they be incorporated into Israel and now part of God's chosen people and proceeding. I completely agree.
I suppose there is an alternative, and I'm not advocating this viewpoint, I imagine that someone who's making this type of objection or thinking about, conversations I've had that have raised this very thought, there is a potential third option. Not that they would be killed, not that they would be taken, but that, the Israelites just wouldn't have been aggressive and wouldn't have attacked, that they could have let these people live. And of course, there's a shared presupposition that we all have that to be assimilated into this community is actually better for them to worship, or at least have access to the true and living God, as opposed to living a long, fruitful life not knowing the true and living God, because we believe in an afterlife and we believe in judgment after that and all these kinds of things. So the question, is it better to live a long, peaceful life of 100 years and die and go to hell forever, or would it be better to live even a shorter life and know the true and living God and be part of the resurrection of life or something like that? These are reasons why conversations like this can't ever reach any agreement, because the people who would want to say, well, Israel in this case is the aggressor, couldn't they have just left these people alone? They would disagree with the superiority of the God of the Israelites. They would disagree with the fact that judgment is necessary, or that God should judge these people. Just leave them alone. Why is your God so angry and aggressive? And so when you have just such different presuppositions, you can never come to it is difficult to come to any kind of agreement. Whereas, we're told that they were the aggressors because of this sin. There was sin that happened, and God brings judgment. And quite frankly, this isn't the first. This won't be the last. I anticipate that when we read passages like what we read with Noah and the ark, like that seems harsh, that God flooded the entire world and killed everybody. Now there's other civilizations after the Table of Nations that are worshiping false gods, and sometimes they are brought under judgment by a sovereign God. And that always makes people, especially people who don't worship that God, uncomfortable. And if we're being honest, it even makes people who do worship that God uncomfortable. Like, as we've said before, there's reasons why there are, a significant segment of the modern Christian population who wants to distance themselves from the Old Testament. It's passages just like these that they would just rather say, well, we're going to unhitch so that we don't have to explain things like this. But, if we're going to take those presuppositions, everything you guys said is right, and I wouldn't add anything. So my only addition is that somebody could conceivably say, well, those aren't the only two options. Israel could have just left them alone and not come in and attack them, not killed all their men, left them to their homes, that would have been probably
they could have disobeyed and been punished. You're right.
Well, the objection assumes an epistemological relativism too. The objection assumes a relativistic framework where nobody's really right, nobody's really wrong, nobody can actually know that they worship the one true and living God, and that other people worship false gods of their own making. So we can't actually say that it's better that these people be assimilated into Israelite culture, because you can't assume.
And if we can say that,
the answer is yes, I can.
Yeah.
I can assume that my God is the true God.
If we can say that, we can also say, well, killing them isn't wrong, and rape isn't wrong, and murder isn't wrong. As soon as you're willing to take, I know you're not saying this, but if you take that position, you have no grounds for any morality or any ethic whatsoever. And so,
you've eliminated your own ground to object.
Yeah, someone who's consistent would have to allow both of those extremes. But of course, most people, at least that I've talked to, they do have some sort of underlying standard, but it's sourced within themselves, and they think it's relativistic based on what they judge by their own eyes and with their own opinions. And any God is just as good as any other one, or no God is just the same as any others, and all civilizations are equal, and we should, whoever's the aggressor is the problem. If we're taking the Bible at face value, there aren't any other options, and God was being, in fact, I think, very merciful. Getting back to Micah, how you started this off, like, would the preference be, if we take these things as true, that they just kill all of them? Well, they were given an opportunity that actually is very merciful and kind if viewed through that lens, but most people, even Christians, sometimes it's very hard to read this and see it as an expression of kindness or mercy. If we all got what we deserve, not just the Midianites, but even these Israelites, God would judge everybody. We've seen that already in the flood. And so for anybody to be spared is actually an act of mercy. It's just interesting how, I've said this several times, and I keep on saying, the more that I study the scriptures and the more that I feel like I know God who's revealed through these scriptures, the more when I read through the Old Testament, I don't see an overly judgmental God. In fact, I see his kindness and restraint. I can't believe he allows as much time sometimes. I can't believe he allows some cultures to persist as long as they do. Understanding his holiness and righteousness, everybody should have died here. That's why Moses was angry. Why didn't you kill everybody? Like, everybody should have died. And so this objectionable part is just, it is, depending on the view at which you see it. Of course, this is terrible. Judgment is harsh. Eric, as you were talking about, war is a disgusting, terrible thing, right? I mean, humans, it's awful. But all of this goes back to what? It goes back to sin. It goes back to death and brokenness entering into the world. And really, this is what God is trying to solve. God isn't for war. He's against it. We go back to what God originally made in the garden, something it seems like he's trying to, I don't know, spoiler alert, right? Doesn't that seem like what he's trying to bring us back to, something like that? He's not trying to bring us to a place that's filled with war. But because of sin, judgment is a part of it. And quite frankly, it's icky. It's harsh. It's death. It's ugly. And passages like this are the fruit of that. And the swiftness of God's justice is always uncomfortable to people, especially people who do not believe in the holiness and righteousness of God. But even for people who do, it can still be passages like these early on in my Christian walk. I read them and it was very uncomfortable. So I can't settle it for anybody. I can acknowledge that I understand why it's hard for some people to read it. And maybe if you take all of the information we've seen about who God is and what he's doing, maybe possibly you can see that God was being kind in sparing the lives of at least some of the people from this camp that judgment was coming upon.
Yeah, there's other details that make this more, I don't know. I don't want to use the wrong word here, but they kind of like make it less severe in a way. Midian's meeting with Israel was not by accident. Balaam came up with this plan to use the women of Midian to seduce Israel and lead them into sin so they would be judged. This was not an accident. This was all the incident at Peor in Numbers 25 was entirely by design. And so this wasn't just two people just happening to bump into each other on their way to the grocery store. This was a meeting that was designed to bring about sin and in doing so bring about judgment on Israel. Because remember, Balaam couldn't curse Israel. So he created the situation in which they would basically bring the curse on themselves, and that's what happened. I also want to say that when it says spare for yourselves, I think what you guys said is right. I think that these the women who were of age probably became wives, or the we don't know all the ages here, but if they're virgins, they're probably young, and then they had to come of age at some point later on. But spare for yourselves is actually literally just keep alive, which makes it a little bit more obscure. And assuming that spare for yourselves is the meaning, which it probably is, there's more than one way to understand this, because in this day it was there's actually, I can't go to the example because it's farther ahead of Scripture, but captive girls, young girls, were sometimes used as domestic servants. So a young girl could be taken as a captive and then given to, for example, the wife of a Israelite soldier, and the girl would become the maid of the soldier's wife. And
I'm not sure that's any less objectionable to most modern readers. I mean, going from destroyed to forced marriages to indentured servitude or something like that. I mean, these are all. You're right, but I don't know that that's any. Do you think that that's any less objectionable to somebody who maybe was raising a problem like this?
Well, I mean, it leaves out the sexual part, So I mean, for that reason, I mean, I think it's less. And is it? There's no scenario where every modern day person is going to grin ear to ear about it. I mean, and people these days will look under a microscope to find problems with the Bible. So no matter what you say, there's never going to be a satisfactory answer.
And we've already talked about the fact that that servitude and slavery in the Old Testament came with righteous laws and standards and a system that protected and provide for those people. So to assume whether it is marriage having a sexual component, and so that's like automatically oppressive and bad to our modern view, or servitude that has to be bad. It's taking things, slapping whatever modern progressive leftist label you want on it and going, look, they're the bad guy. God's the bad guy in this story. Well, yeah, we're never going to get away from that. But as Christians, let's keep everything that we've read so far and everything we're going to read all in context and understand it as a whole, not through whatever modern lens happens to be popular in our culture today.
Eric, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You said it's. Do you see any indication in Numbers chapter 25, specifically in this chapter, that it was by design that the people of Israel whored with the Midianite women and went after Baal?
I think that comes in later chapters.
Okay, I just wanted to. So I didn't see it. It comes. It definitely comes later on in the Bible. That explanation of it. But I just wanted
for him to get a demerit. Is that what you're doing?
I'm trying in a roundabout way. I'm trying to point out that Eric, I think deserves at least half of a demerit for his explanation of that.
I think people.
Oh, come on!
I say that. I do it.
Like you alluded to something from Revelation.
No, I didn't. It's in Numbers.
Well, yeah, I mean, the explicit explanation of it is in Revelation. I was just trying to get Eric in trouble.
I mean, you're right, but I actually read it from. There's a text in Numbers that explicitly says that, and I of course, now that I need to find it, I won't be able to. Anyway, I think we're probably ready to move on now.
All right, well, let's move on. At the end of this chapter, we're back in Numbers chapter 31, verses 48 to 54. There's this voluntary offering that is brought because after the slaughter happens, after this judgment is carried out through the hands of their warring men, they find that none is missing. So they were able to somehow carry out this judgment without losing a single person. My question is why? I don't know that it says explicitly. It says that they brought this offering, but not why. Do you guys think that they felt guilty? Were they atoning for something? Were they just offering praise and worship and thanksgiving to God for sparing them through this? Because it would have been, I imagine it was probably pretty rare for a skirmish or a battle or a war to have all the casualties be on one side and have zero on the other. So how do you guys read this? Why did they make this offering? Worship, atonement, something else?
As I read the text, I see this as kind of a both and an atonement and a thanksgiving. The thanksgiving should be obvious, I think, just because, hey, we took a census and we all survived. But the atonement, somebody might say, well, why the atonement? You were told to go do this. This was your responsibility to go and do this. But that doesn't change the fact that, to quote a famous pastor, war is icky. In the words of Joe, I'm
not famous.
You're right. As I was preparing for this question, have you guys all seen the show Band of Brothers? Did you guys watch that?
Some of it.
Okay. It depicts, the Battle of Bastogne, where at one point, the U.S. soldiers can hear the German soldiers on Christmas Eve singing Christmas carols. And like, if you take that seriously, like if that happened, the weight of what that would have felt like as a Christian sitting in trench, hearing your enemy, that your job, your responsibility, better or worse, is to go and fight, singing, hymns or Christmas carols. Regardless of whether or not it's your job to go do this, that doesn't take away from the fact that there's guilt, that there's pain, that there's hardship. This isn't, just because they were told to go and kill the Midianites doesn't make me think that they were like, yeah, I just want to chop me some heads off, right? Like, however that shakes out, that's horrible and sad, and their blood was spilt. And so I think in an atonement, listen, we are sorry that we had to do this. We take no joy or pleasure from it. I think that's fitting and seems good to me.
I think it was actually an atonement for sin. If you look earlier in the chapter in verses 14 through 16, Moses was angry with the officers of the army, the captains of thousands, the captains of hundreds, who had come from service in the war. And Moses said, "Have you spared all the women? Behold, these caused the sons of Israel through the counsel of Balaam." Here's the verse I was talking about, Micah. "To trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor, so the plague was among the congregation of the Lord." So this, these leaders of the army, they were supposed to have these women killed, but they didn't, and so they had to atone for that sin by offering what they did. So I think that explains it.
So yeah, I did want to bring that up as I was rereading the passage. Verse 16 does say, according to the advice of Balaam. I had overlooked that. So
do you get a demerit for falsely accusing your brother?
Let it be done to me as I intended to do to Eric.
He was digging a pit, and he's the one who fell into it.
Yep,
so that's
exactly.
Fitting. Yeah.
I should have known better. But anyways, yeah, I think there's actually a much more straightforward example or answer to the question that we're talking about, though. In Exodus chapter 30, verses 11 through 16, when you take a census, this is the caveat, that you have to offer a sacrifice of atonement, or you have to offer atonement on behalf of those whom you take in the. When you take a census, you have to offer atonement for the people that you count. That's Exodus chapter 30. Verses 11 through 16. I won't go back and read it now, but there is a census tax which does use the language of atonement, I believe, in that passage. So I think
you see this offering as in response to the census that was taken before this battle. No, the census taken after the battle.
After the battle. So, like, basically, it's a recognition that these are the people that the Lord has kept alive, has given to us. They belong to the Lord. We're counting them, so we must recognize that they belong to the Lord fundamentally. I think that's what's going on. I think that's the reason for the Exodus 30 verses 11 through 16 law or rule, and I think this is a expression of it.
But depends how literalistically you want to take. I don't think it's a bad answer. Like I think it's a rather insightful answer, which surprises me, Micah.
I knew that was coming. As soon as you started to say insightful, I'm like, there's no way this ends in a compliment.
Here's a backhand coming with this compliment.
Yeah. When you take a census of the sons of Israel to number them, each one of them shall give a ransom for himself to the Lord, and so. How literalistically you want to take that? You go, okay, well, each of the men in the battle didn't give an offering. The representatives, the leaders of the army did. So again, that's interesting. Hadn't considered it. Would want to consider it more. But just on the very first reading, I go, that's not exactly what happened. But
verse 53 says that the men in the army had each taken plunder for himself, and then some of that is what gets offered through the chiefs. It appears. Yeah, so the officers approach them, verse 50, we've brought the Lord's offering, what each man found, articles of gold, armlets, bracelets, signets, earrings, and beads, to make atonement for ourselves before the Lord. And then once again in verse 53, the men in the army had each taken plunder for himself. So I do think that this is sort of a representation of what was due for each man.
Gotcha. So once again, strikingly and oddly insightful. Well done.
Glad I asked the question, because that's I think that's excellent.
You're kind of taking credit because you asked the question and you
brought
this forth.
I wasn't taking credit. I said I'm thankful. There was no backhand to my compliment at all. I said
if there was no question, there would not have been this answer.
I mean, maybe that's true, but you're making that observation, not me. All the thoughts that you guys had said, aside from Micah's connection, I had at least thought in my mind. But I think that at least is that's something that should be considered. So I appreciate bringing it up. I got nothing else to add, so we can move on unless you guys have anything else to add to this conversation.
We can jump into chapter 32. My question is, the sons of Reuben and Gad asked Moses for the land of Gilead as their inheritance because they had, it says, an exceedingly large number of livestock. After establishing certain terms, and the terms were that Reuben and Gad would help the other tribes conquer Canaan, Moses did agree to give them the land. My question, though, has to do with verses 34 through 38, because those verses list several cities built by the sons of Reuben and Gad, or at least by their descendants. And if Moses wrote all the Torah, how do you explain this list of cities? Do you think that all of these cities were built before Moses died? How do you guys explain this?
Yeah, so I think we have to remember that sometimes maybe the English isn't capturing every nuance of what is originally there. I don't think it's actually necessary to say that they physically built these cities from the ground up. In fact, I think that there's indications in the text there's indications in the text to the contrary. It appears that what the plan is, from a combination of verses 16, 24, 26, 34 and 35, and 40, it appears that the plan was for them to quickly fortify whatever destruction or whatever was
reconstitute those cities that were destroyed.
Whatever the situation was with those cities, it appears that the plan was to fortify those rather quickly, maybe, and then leave their women and children there while they go and fight the battle in the land. So, like, some people will say, well, Moses couldn't have wrote this, so it had to be some sort of an inspired editor or something later on. Well, God could have done that if he wanted to do that, but I don't think that's a necessary interpretation. I think that it's perfectly possible that this was something that they quickly did. They quickly fortified those cities, quickly made them inhabitable and safe places to live for their wives and their children, while they went and fought. I don't think it's necessary to see that this was something entirely in the past, like, oh yeah, and they built all these cities from the ground up, and this is like a years later addition or observation about what they accomplished.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable position to take. I also don't find it unreasonable to think that in the transfer of leadership, that Joshua at this point is the primary author of this, as he's recording, coloring in details, filling in details, not coloring in details, filling in details, and so I don't find either of those to be unreasonable positions to take.
I'm also not sure how long. I mean, when they talk about cities, I'm not sure how, that means that they were immediately at their most developed form or something like that. So, I mean, establishing a place where people are living and, people build their, they put their tents. They already had probably, temporary dwelling places. Maybe they had some places that they could move into. But if they go to, they already have a functioning society. And so if people settle in a land, establishing a city could simply be these people now are here instead of wandering through the wilderness. And it could be as simple as that. And then over time, the city's developed, with more improvements or infrastructure or other types of things as well. So it's interesting, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Eric. You're the one asking the question. Do you have an answer for it?
So I think some of the things that Micah said are true. I think that, I think there were some of these cities where they basically just fortified them and they put their children and wives in there. I think I do see that, but just the way that it reads, like in, it says in verse 34, the sons of Gad built, they built these cities. And then it says in verse 38, in Nebo and Baal-Meon, their names being changed in Sibma, they gave other names to the cities which they built. So I guess the question is, what does built mean? Does built, it seems like to me there's a distinction made between fortified and built. If all they did was fortify cities that already existed, then you'd think that the word fortified would consistently be used.
Well, but except, I mean, to bat on Micah's side of this, verse 37, the sons of Reuben built Heshbon and whatever word that is, and whatever word the other one is, Nebo, and their names being changed. So here were cities that existed, yet their names were changed, but yet it says that they built those cities, and so built up, established, fortified. I'm not convinced that built can't mean something essentially what Micah would argue for.
Also in verses 24 through 26, we get the explicit command, build cities for your little ones and folds for your sheep, and do what you have promised. But then just go forward just a little bit to verse 26. Our little ones and our wives and our livestock and all our cattle shall remain there in the cities of Gilead. Like, it appears that, like, whatever is meant by built here, it doesn't appear that you're starting from scratch. It appears that, like, you're
fortifying.
You're fortifying or doing something with cities that already remained and were somewhat inhabitable. So like especially the combination between verses 24 and 26, I think makes me say, okay, like these were places that already existed in some capacity. It wouldn't have taken very long, and that would fit with the earlier promise, right? Where God told them, look, you're going to go and you're going to inhabit places that you didn't build and you didn't. You're going to take fields that you didn't plant and all that stuff. Like, all these blessings are waiting for you. You're not going to have to build it from scratch, from the ground up. I think that fits with the overall narrative arc of what God promised when they took the land as well.
Yeah,
Sure.
I agree with that. Eric, did you have anything to add? I have a follow-up question, but
No, I've considered all that, and I what he said, the earlier verses were clearly, without any doubt, there were cities that already existed, and they were putting their. I mean, no one should dispute that because it plainly says that. And then it says, like, build. He tells them, build, cities and stuff for your little ones, and it says right after that they did just that. So I guess, if you're going to take the position that Moses himself wrote this apart from, I guess you could say, apart from Revelation, then you have to take the view that these are cities that they're basically just, they already exist, but they're just kind of adding, they're adding more to, like, fortifications to make them safe and things like that. If built means, from the ground up, in some cases, it doesn't mean that in every case, we know that. But if it means that in other cases, then this would have to be, these cities that were built from the ground up would have to have been built after the days of Moses, in which case Moses presumably wouldn't have written that down.
yeah. Well, my follow-up question is related to this. Speaking of, Reuben and Gad, this land that they're talking about is outside of the promised land. And so the promises about going into this land that is currently occupied, that they're going to drive the inhabitants out, and then they'll be able to presumably at least use something that remains of their fields and their homes and whatever else. This is outside of that boundary. And then Reuben and Gad ask, well, this is a suitable place. Can we just settle here? Moses, of course, originally takes that as disobedience and possibly as violation, similar to maybe what happened before when the Israelites were refusing to enter into the promised land that God had given them. And instead we're saying, hey, why don't we just stay somewhere else because this is preferable. But then after they explain their reasoning, that they do still plan to go in, they just want to have this place, afterwards. After the conquest is over, they're looking forward to when God fulfills the promise fully, they'll come back to this land, which is outside of the boundaries, and Moses permits that. You guys have any thought on this? Again, we talked about, I don't necessarily need us to go into, God changing his mind, but Moses' interaction with them, this promise, the way he interprets it at first, he listens to their answer, then he allows for it, and now they're kind of expanding the borders beyond what they were promised before. It's maybe a can of worms or a thorny issue potentially, or maybe you have a really straightforward answer. I'm just interested in your thoughts on any of this conceptually, and maybe if there's implications for us today.
As far as why Reuben and Gad made the request, we know why they did, because they had an exceedingly large number of livestock, and so when they saw the land of Gilead and the land of, I think it's Jazer, if that's how you pronounce it, it was perfect for their livestock. So that's why they asked. Now, that's not the full answer, because obviously they were supposed to enter Canaan and take Canaanite land. So I guess when I read this, I assumed that there had to have been a little bit of a lack of faith, because doesn't this imply that they didn't think the land of Canaan could support their livestock? So that would suggest a lack of faith. It's worth noting their words in verse 19. It says, "For we will not have an inheritance with them on the other side of the Jordan and beyond, because our inheritance has fallen to us on this side of the Jordan toward the east." It almost sounds like they believed they were meant to inherit this particular land. I might be reading too much into this. My question about, or your question about Moses, and my answer to it is, I think that's kind of more of the mystery. The context makes it clear that Moses initially got angry because they didn't want Canaanite land. They wanted this land. But after they agreed to help the rest of Israel conquer Canaan, Moses did agree to give them the land. And he may have thought that conquering the land of Canaan was more important than apportioning it in a particular way. So his thought, and I'm speculating about this, but he may have thought, well, as long as the land is conquered and occupied, it doesn't really matter how we apportion it out so much as it matters the fact that it's conquered and Israel has control over it. So maybe he thought, the apportioning of it was a much less, it was a lesser issue than, which tribe ended up where. Because the tribes did eventually end up getting it by lot, the casting lots for it. So I'm doing some speculating, thinking out loud, but that's just how I would respond.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting to think about. I don't know that the boundaries of their inheritance in every single text where they're promised, they're not always exactly the same. For instance, if you go back and read Genesis 15, the boundaries that God promised to Abraham that his children would inhabit are much more expansive than what we're going to see even in that they were initially allotted in the coming chapters here. So I don't know that it is necessary to say, well, there was some lack of faith because this wasn't the inheritance that they were promised. I think that if you look at God's promise to Abram in Genesis chapter 15, it seems like much more expansive of this entire region. It seems like everything from Egypt to the Euphrates is sort of God saying, look, this is all going to belong to you. So I don't know that it's necessary to say, well, this is some lack of faith on the part of Reuben and Gad, especially when it seems that Moses just misunderstood their question. That's the way that this reads to me, is Moses is worried about the lack of faith and the grumbling and the not trusting in God, because obviously that caused so much disaster previously. But it appears that the way the narrative unfolds, it's a simple misunderstanding. They're not saying we're not going to go in and fight with you. They're not saying we're not trusting in God. We're saying, hey, this land looks great and it fits our needs perfectly. And it seems that God is giving the best that we can judge the unfolding providence of God. It seems that he's giving us this land as our inheritance. I think it's just a misunderstanding, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. As I read the text and have read the text in the past, I don't know if this is a good thing or not. It on its face, it doesn't seem like a great thing. But I can understand Moses's initial assumption that this was a bad thing, based upon the people's proclivity in the past to be so unfaithful, to not want what it is God has given. We've seen that with manna, we've seen it with quail, we've seen it, all over the place. And so I think he has good reason why he should assume that their motives aren't the best. And so I don't know what to make of, at the end of the day, is there not going in and taking, possessing what was explicitly promised to Moses, was that better or worse? I don't have an answer for that, to be honest.
Fair enough. Well, for the sake of time, we probably should continue on.
Yeah, so I had a question about Numbers 33. In verses 50 to 56, God gave Moses further instructions about possessing the land. And in the last verse, God said, "And as I plan to do to them, so I will do to you." How do you guys interpret this statement?
I think it's pretty simple. It's just talking about dispossession and exile. And by the way, that, I don't know, this will get me a demerit. It does happen. It does happen. They do get dispossessed as well. In almost exactly the same way that the inhabitants of the land that they were dispossessing got dispossessed. So yeah, I think it's a pretty simple answer.
Well, God, he keeps his promises. When he promises to bless, he fulfills. When he promises to curse or to judge, he fulfills. And so, they should take this very seriously. If they do not drive out all the inhabitants, God will dispossess them just like they were supposed to dispossess the current inhabitants. And I'll let Micah take the full demerit that we do eventually see God do exactly as he says. So, there should be warnings that, we've heard this instruction. We talked about it with the tabernacle. The repetition that, Moses did exactly as they said. They did exactly as was said. They should do exactly as was said here, and I guess we'll keep our eyes open. Seems like, spoiler alert, they probably won't do exactly as was said, but God will still keep he will keep his word, because they were not faithful to do exactly what he told them to.
Okay, so I had another question about Numbers chapter 34. The land boundaries are included in the first section of the chapter. Are these boundaries consistent with those God gave Abraham back in Genesis chapter 15? Micah talked about this earlier. What are we to make of this? Is there anything more that can be said about this?
I think that's actually a really important observation. I think what is promised and granted to Abram in Genesis 15 is, I don't want to say, there's got to be a better word than potential. But it appears that what is granted to Abram in that promise, there is room to expand into. So obviously, the kingdom under David and Solomon is much more expansive than it originally is when the Israelites come in and dispossess the Canaanites and receive their land allotments. It expands massively, especially under Solomon. It appears that the way that the land was granted to them and promised, there was original land allotments for an inheritance, but there was also room to grow into that promise that God had made. That's the best possible way that I could think of to explain it.
Well, you did earn another demerit for going to David and Solomon, but you went beyond the initial question. He didn't even realize he did it this time.
I didn't.
So, but you thought if you didn't admit it that you wouldn't get caught. You did. I have nothing to add to that, though. I think your explanation is fair, and certainly it seems like, if I'm understanding what you said, that the promise to Abram was bigger than this one, and then this promise is allowed to grow bigger into the broader promise that was made to Abram. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I think so. It's not something I have fully worked out in my mind. So if there are problems with that, then somebody else can smack me around for it. But
yeah, some of the geographical issues. I've never been to this land. Maybe some of you have. You've been to Israel or something. I've this part of the world I've never been to. Some of these boundaries and things I just don't have a full. Geography is one of my biggest areas of weakness in understanding some of these things. So I wouldn't be prepared to call you on that. I mean, what you said makes sense to me, but I'm not an expert enough to be able to say that that's correct or incorrect.
I've read commentaries that agree with what Micah just said, so I think there's got to be some truth to it.
At least I'm not the only
if the
one.
commentaries say it, and Mike says it, Micah says that there has to be truth to it. So, Greg, you got any insight to drop on us, or does that sound?
No, I mean, everything I found what Micah said to be compelling, but everything that I would want to reply would necessitate me piling onto his demerit rather than me joining in his demerit, not piling on. But so I'll just be done.
Well, let's jump into chapter 35. What was the purpose of the cities of refuge? We read about these cities here, and we'll read about them elsewhere. But what is the purpose of the cities of refuge in the law?
Well, the text seems to say that they were a place where somebody who accidentally murdered someone could go and live safely, not worried that that death would be avenged if, in fact, it was proved that they weren't guilty of intentional, premeditated murder, as we might call it in our context.
It's an important concept because it establishes the need for intent when it comes to like degrees of murder, or like the difference between murder or manslaughter.
Manslaughter. Yeah.
This appears to be somewhere where manslaughterers, who, by the way, that doesn't mean that they're guiltless with regard to the life of another. Like the city of refuge is probably still some sort of a punishment. You're gonna have to leave your family. You're gonna have to go somewhere else, live somewhere else. We don't know what these places were like. So it probably is still some sort of a punishment because you were at least careless with the life of another. I think that's an implication here. So, people want to say, well, I've heard people in our modern day say that there was no such thing as prisons in the Old Covenant economy. And what I want to say is, well, prisons as we have them now, yes, but there were these cities of refuge that was somewhere where you had to go and live, where you have to physically relocate to somewhere else. We don't know what exactly all that looked like, but it also implies that it is, at least, even though it's a mercy, it's probably still some form of a punishment for being careless with the life of another human being.
Well, I mean, is this, I guess I struggle with, as I read the text, I'm not even convinced that careless, like it seems to me that accident falls in. And so I could foresee situations where you could say like, listen, this is a God thing. Like I wasn't quote unquote careless. I wasn't, irresponsible. Like, it just happened, and I wouldn't have wanted it if I could have helped it.
Like you weren't texting while driving, your brakes went out. Something like that.
Yeah.
Well, it seems as we read the law, it does seem like certain forms of negligence that you were responsible for. I am one of those people who says that the Old Covenant doesn't seem to have a prison system, at least as modernly understood. But I think your point is well made, and it seems to me that even the name of these things is a city of refuge. Yes, it is. It does seem like a punishment of sorts. Certainly if you have to go to this place and be placed here for however long that would be, but also it is to protect you from this Avenger of Blood. And so, even if you bear some guilt, but not guilt unto death, this is a place for you to be spared from, some sort of other extension of justice beyond what your punishment deserves. And so it is interesting to think like, I think we're going to talk about who this Avenger of Blood is, and who's responsible, in fact, for putting this murderer to death, or this person who caused the death of another person, that you can be spared from that, but you do have to flee. You have to flee and then find refuge in another place. So punishment, yes, I think, or some sort of, there is some penalty for having to move, but also at least the name of the place implies that it is for their protection as well, to protect them from vigilante justice, perhaps, or some other kind of punishment that is excessive based on the law that is being given. And so you might bear some guilt, but guilt unto death, not in this case. And so off you go to this place to be preserved from a too harsh administration of justice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I could tell you if Joe and I were out cutting wood and, I cut a limb and it fell and smacked Joe in the head and killed Joe, surely not intentional. But if I had to, from my family's perspective, if I had to go and flee and stay in another town, but I could live and be productive and provide for my family in that other town, that would be hardly a punishment if the option was, at least in my family's eyes, put me to death for it. Is it a punishment? I suppose, but man, is it a gracious one?
Especially since my sons know what you say about me, so they might think you did it on purpose, even if you say you didn't. So they might come looking for you, which is why
one of them would thank me at least.
Which is why you being in a city of refuge might protect you from the others who weren't planning to thank you, but who had different intentions for you.
Exactly.
Well, that actually leads me to another question. So who was responsible for putting a murderer to death under the law? Let's assume this is not someone who did it accidentally, but this is someone who intentionally murdered somebody. So who was responsible for putting a murderer to death under the law, and what does this teach us about justice?
Yeah, so I actually don't think that the Avenger of Blood is someone seeking vigilante justice. It appears that it was some sort of appointed magistrate, because he is the appointed means by which the person who's genuinely a murderer is to be put to death. So the Avenger of Blood is, I don't think it refers necessarily to vigilante justice. I think it refers to the appointed means by which God will bring about the death of a murderer. So,
and by definition, it can't be vigilante justice, because this vigilante is authorized to kill this person if
Yeah.
they're outside the city of refuge. So by definition, whatever we think of as vigilante justice, this can't be it.
Yeah. So I don't know exactly who that would be. Maybe previous texts would shed light on that, but off the top of my head, I can't say for sure.
Maybe I misunderstood your question, but I think you said in the situation where it was intentional. Is that what you asked, Eric?
Yeah, in a situation where it is murder.
Well, if it is murder, then it's the people's responsibility to put it's the community's responsibility, right? So as I understand it, as what we're talking about here in this text, the Avenger of Blood, that is for the person. That's only when we're dealing with somebody who did it unintentionally. Am I misreading?
Well,
the
so
text?
my question is more specific than that. My question is, who is chosen to be
I have
the
no
Avenger of Blood when someone is murdered?
Gotcha.
Is there another passage that answers that question from earlier in the law?
So it's not explicit, but the common answer, the one that I've seen repeatedly, is that the nearest of kin to the murdered person is appointed as the
Avenger of Blood.
Avenger of Blood. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. Yes. So, and the reason being is that would be logically the only person that would really care to do that. Like if you pick a stranger and the stranger is supposed to hunt this person down, I mean, it doesn't really make any sense.
I assume the argument's the nearest male relative.
Yes.
So Joe's sons.
The nearest.
So Joe's sons.
Yeah.
Looking for Greg.
Yeah. I mean, or like his, maybe a brother or, nearest of kin, whatever that means. That person, it's kind of like, it's a similar, although it's certainly not identical principle. And like in Leviticus 25, where you have the nearest of kin appointed to redeem a relative. That, like if some guy, like, if he, is impoverished or something, or he's got to redeem a property or something, the nearest of kin was in a position to do stuff like that. So that, I think the principle comes from there primarily, but I don't see it as being, if it's mentioned, I don't know where it's mentioned. I don't think it's explicitly stated, but that's the very common answer you'll get among scholars.
Yeah, that's certainly what I've heard. Is that's why I chose my sons as the example. Is that it is it's similar to the kinsman redeemer. It's like this nearest family line, but instead of the redeeming for the inheritance, this is redeeming for the blood that was shed. And so the position isn't necessarily like, we've all seen movies where like back in the medieval times, there were like appointed executioners, who just kind of carried out justice as kind of a function of the magistrate's authority. I think that this position, at least as I understand it, fits more with what you're describing. And it's probably because I've read some of the same, commentaries or whatever that you have, that it seems the best description is that this was not an official position of the government or some like priest or something, but that this mantle would be put upon, like if the case that Greg was fictionally giving in my household, that my nearest relative, if I had a brother maybe or sons or however that would be, that they would take on that mantle temporarily until the blood of the person who shed my blood was shed, and then that mantle would be gone. They're no longer that, unless and until another situation arises in which they would have to do so again. So the carrying out, we've talked about this before with some of the other punishments, of how the community itself bore responsibility for meting out justice. They were in many ways a self-governing people. Like if they witnessed a crime and they gave testimony to a crime, they were to put their hand to executing the justice for this. It wasn't separated, so this interpretation, at least of the Avenger of Blood, would really fit well with that. That they are bearing some of the responsibility and burden for meting out justice, which also then explains why you might need a city of refuge. This isn't some dispassionate, disinterested person. This is probably someone who is, you can understand why it could go into vigilante justice, because, you're talking about someone who is, I don't know, like our modern court systems are always hearing about things that happen to people that aren't necessarily related to them. But even if you are having to hear a case for someone who is, so close to you, you might have to recuse yourself because your passion or your emotions about the subject matter might make you partial. So to have a city where you could flee to be protected from the Avenger of Blood, because maybe they wouldn't say, well, it was an accident. I'm not coming to get you. Maybe they couldn't be talked down. And so the city of refuge requires, like I said, some of that protection aspect that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and if a person was put to death right away by the Avenger, then you do that before a trial. The trial is the point of the city of refuge was to provide refuge, but also to provide a trial for the person to decide what to do with them. So
it was temporary, and so I don't know what you guys think about this. So the person was supposed to flee there until the death of the high priest. Any implications that you have about that? Like this wasn't a permanent solution. They went there for a while. Eric, as you were just saying, is at least potentially gave some reason to get to the time to get to the bottom of it. But that could be that's a very potentially sliding scale worth of time. How old is the high priest when you go there? Like, I mean, is this a 5-day trip? Is this a 50-year trip? I mean, how long was someone supposed to be there? And any thoughts about this additional caveat later on? What is it? Verse 28, I think. Verse 28, where it says that they have to stay there until the death of the high priest.
So I'll give you an answer that is theoretical, and so do not take this as a dogmatic answer. But I've read this. Several scholars have theorized that the death of the high priest, in some sense, made atonement for the manslayer's sin and secured his freedom. And that may be it would have to be understood in some kind of a symbolic way. So it's not like literally, the high priest made atonement, but it just in a more symbolic way. And understood this way, if this is true, the high priest's death could be viewed as symbolic of the future atoning work of somebody else. So by the high priest dying, it was like a way of saying, because even unintentional sins still needed atonement, right? Like it was. Even throughout the law, we already read, if you commit a sin unintentionally, but then it's discovered that you did it, you have to make atonement, even if it was unintentional. So unintentional sins don't escape the need for atonement. And so some people theorize that the high priest died, that was symbolic of atonement being made, and the person was allowed to return to their city. So anyway, just a theory, not at all dogmatic about it.
Yeah, I don't have a great answer. I would just be ranging around, groping in speculation. But you need to have a marker, I suppose. This person is innocent of murder. I mean, they've determined that it's innocent of murder by the process that's been laid out. So this truly was an accident. And so you need to have a marker. And so is this change in administration, this change of priesthood, why that marker and why not, I'll say, goodness, my brain's not working. 50-year, help me somebody. Jubilee. Thank you. Told you weren't going to get the best out of me today. Why not the Jubilee? I don't have a great answer for that. So
we've also talked about God, his interest in making sure that the land isn't polluted. As this chapter begins to come to an end, it talks about the only way for the land itself to be cleansed from the pollution of a murdered person, for example, is by the blood of the person who killed them also being shed. Any thoughts about this additional things, or have we discussed it all already?
I think it's at least interesting that these cities of refuge sequestered off are sort of like exceptions from the normal pollution rule. Like it appears that if they left, that would mean that they deserve to die, and it would be a kind of polluting of the land, even if it was it wasn't intentional and it wasn't what we call murder. So I think that's at least interesting that there's apparently God gives some sort of an exception in the city of refuge itself, where their presence in that city is not polluting the land. But if they leave, then they deserve to die. The Avenger of Blood is going to come for them and kill them. Because in under those circumstances, they would be polluting the land.
Good enough.
Well, Eric, you want to ask your last question?
Sure. So my question is, on Numbers 36, the final chapter we're going to be talking about. So in this chapter, what additional information do we get regarding the law added by the request of the daughters of Zelophehad, a.k.a. Z-Dog, in Numbers chapter 27? And I could ask it another way. What does this chapter add to the law mentioned in Numbers 27, verses 1 through 11?
The qualification that was perhaps alluded to last time is that if they do get married, verse 2, the Lord commanded my Lord to give the land for an inheritance by lot to the people of Israel, and my Lord was commanded by the Lord to give the inheritance of Zelophehad, our brother, to his daughters. But if they are married to any of the sons of the other tribes of the people of Israel, then their inheritance will be taken from the inheritance of our fathers and added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they will marry. So it will be taken away from the lot of our inheritance. And when the Jubilee of the people of Israel comes, then their inheritance will be added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they marry, and the inheritance will be taken from the inheritance of the tribe of our fathers. And then Moses, in response to that concern, that we're going to lose our inheritance if they marry outside of the tribe. In response to that concern, God, through Moses, basically orders that the inheritance of the people of Israel shall not be transferred from one tribe to another. And basically, these daughters who inherit their father's allotted inheritance, they have to marry within their tribe. So I think that's what's different about it. Is there's further clarification on what happens if these daughters get married.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I just find it interesting. This is just an interesting example of, how come, or interesting exemplification of the question, why didn't God just give all of this in the front? We asked the question before, why didn't God just give this provision when he gave the original one? But here we just, for some reason, continue to see additional clarification as the need arises. That clarification is given.
Well, I think you guys covered that well, and so as we begin to wind down our conversation on the book of Numbers, I acknowledged at least that almost everybody I've ever talked to about Scripture, Leviticus and Numbers are two of the least favorite books. As we get to the end of this doesn't kind of end with any kind of a bang. We were talking about Exodus, and it ends with this glorious description of God's presence coming and dwelling in the tabernacle that they made. It's this amazing climactic ending. Here, this ends with a clarification about inheritance laws. And so I think a lot of people, maybe they're going through this, they're reading about censuses and other stuff, and it doesn't feel like there's any much of a payoff. Should we be more excited about this inheritance stuff that we're reading? Does the way that this book ends kind of give us any insight into what its purpose is? Any other thoughts about this? I mean, again, as we conclude our discussion on the book of Numbers, maybe for some people they're glad we're done and glad to be out of the book of Numbers. I don't know how you guys feel about it. I've been interested in the conversation all along the way. I'm more interested in the inheritance than maybe most people are, but I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts before we say goodbye for this episode.
I think that even as you're reading these chapters, you're supposed to step into the story in such a way that you're anticipating what the children of Israel are anticipating. Remember, this is the first 5 books of the Bible are a unit, and they end, as we're going to see or start exploring next time, Deuteronomy, the repetition of the law as they're about to take the land. It's not supposed to be have this huge payoff at the end of the book. You're not supposed to end the book thinking, wow, this is really all tied together so neatly. No, you're supposed to still have a sense of anticipation and perhaps remain somewhat unsatisfied because it's not done yet. It's not done yet. You're supposed to end on a cliffhanger. You're supposed to be waiting with bated breath, anticipating God's fulfillment of these promises as they go in and take the land. So the inheritance laws, ending with inheritance laws is in a way entirely appropriate for what the book of Numbers is trying to do, trying to anticipate God's faithfulness even while they're still in the wilderness.
Yeah, this just isn't like modern stories where at the end of the book you get your payoff. This is part of a whole, and perhaps we should see Exodus being being something of an anomaly. Like here, it finishes with this great thing, and so Yeah, I'd say just keep on watching, keep seeing what happens. Maybe we're always going to be going, well, not always, but for a long time we're going to be going, well, where's the payoff? Where's the ending? Where's the climax?
Yeah, what Micah said was very similar to what I was thinking, and Greg, you as well. Yeah, I think the whole book has been anticipating the conquest of the land, and so it makes a lot of sense to end the book with laws regarding inheritance. So that makes perfect sense to me.
Well, we'll let that be the last word for today. This is the end of our discussion on Numbers, but it's not the end of the story. And so we do plan to pick it up again next time as we begin our foray into the book of Deuteronomy. We hope to see you all again there. You've heard what we think about this. Why don't you leave your comments below and let us know what you think, whether you agree or disagree, or if there's other things that you find interesting or fascinating that we didn't talk about. We'd love to read your comments there. And if you enjoyed this video, consider clicking the thumbs up button to let YouTube algorithm know that you enjoyed it and possibly have it be shared with other people. And if you are not subscribed, you could consider subscribing, because we have a long way to go before we finish this biblical theology project. And if we see you guys again, great, but I look forward to seeing you gentlemen again next time. And until we see you all again, get equipped, obey your king, and glorify your God.
Is that an apology?